Hi guys, Asmo here, and it's that time of the league when we pull out the build roulette and pick a completely random skill and ascendancy and try to take it to the end game. Occasionally on my stream someone will ask, hey Asmo, I have like 20 divines or 50 or 100 or however much they have, what build would you recommend for T16 mapping? Or people ask if X build can kill Guardians or Eater of Worlds, and people seem to be under the impression that you need to play a meta build or some kind of a specific build to do all the endgame content of PoE. So to prove a point, I decided to take any random incoherent build idea that I will randomly generate and put the same amount of effort and currency as I would put in any other random build that I would want to try and showcase the results. The step one was to naturally roll the random build, so the build roulette has every active skill gem in the game that can possibly be built around, and it randomizes the ascendancy choice to go with it. For me, it selected the Frostblink, at which point I was hoping for something like an elementalist because that would be very easy, but the ascendancy I got was the Sabo. So at that point I immediately decided I'll go with Frostblink traps because it would be very lame of me to just ignore the ascendancy and go for the self-cast. So it was a choice between mines or traps, and the traps have a few advantages over mines. First of all, we can benefit from the over-prepared notable, which gives us an extra cooldown charge to use, and secondly, the chain reaction ascendancy notable gives us 50% cooldown recovery as well as 50% increased AoE. Both are very useful for the Frostblink. The way I like to make new builds is to first level with the skill in order to learn more about it, learn all the downsides and all the intangible things that come out during playing that you can't really get from PoB. I like to see how is the AoE to know if I need to invest more into it, how is the mana regen, which depends on how often you're actually casting the spell, not just the cast rate on PoB. The mobility, the survivability, and the general feel of the character will usually inform me about any changes and consideration that I need to make for the build. Leveling with the Frost build was actually incredibly fun and easy. I was able to do it with the self-cast at first before I committed to the traps, because the first notable that we get from the first lab is the blind one. It was very fun and easy and made me want to play actual self-cast Frostblink character, but that's something that I'll have to explore in the future. So with the right choice of the leveling gear and the right support gems, I ended up killing actually most of the targets with the hit damage, even though I was scaling the ignite damage. Due to the cooldown of the Frostblink, in order to have a good DPS uptime, we have to naturally play this as an ignite version, and that way we only have to hit the target every few seconds in order to constantly deal damage to it. And since I'm not playing an elementalist, we have to actually follow the rules and convert all of the damage from cold to fire. So from level 16 I was using the cold to fire support gem as well as a catalyzed pyre ring. And then we have to also make sure that we pick up the right passives, support gems and items to actually get the 100% chance to ignite. The leveling was extremely quick and felt way better than something even like Hollow Pound technique because of the ridiculous mobility and damage, but I knew that the trap playstyle is not gonna have the same instant damage delivery. So I did my labs and I started making the build in PoB after the campaign was finished. My goal was to ideally get a few million DPS while maintaining the basic defenses that any character should have for a comfortable playing experience. I didn't want to make like a pure glass cannon build because we're already at a big disadvantage due to using a mechanically weak combination of skills. So for the defenses of the builds, we have the elemental ailment immunity, we have shock and ignite immunity from the ascendancy, freeze from Pantheon, and chill immunity from the boots. We are running Grace, Determination, and the Defiance banner, which together with Jade and Granite Flask give us a lot of basic defensive stats. We're using armor, which enables us to also benefit from the Val Molten Shell with a cast when damage taken Molten Shell setup. We have 100% spell suppression chance and also endurance charges coming from the Enduring Composure, and on top of that we have the blind aura around us, which makes the enemies deal reduced damage. So during mapping we also have a lot of recovery on kill that comes from the Cinder Swallow Urn and the Polymath Forbidden Jewels, and since our trap ignites, the ignite killing monsters actually counts as us killing the monsters, thus granting us that huge amount of recovery on kill reliably in maps. And for bossing we can rely on the extra life flasks for recovery because we won't be able to sustain our armor and evasion flasks anyway. The character is decently mobile, we have a respectable amount of movement speed, especially with phasing on left click, which has a very short cooldown, and a spammable leap slam plus flame dash for bossing. And now when it comes to damage, we're getting a lot of extra levels for the Frostblink, for the base damage, and all of the regular things that you would expect, like increased fire damage over time multiplier, burning damage, etc. A big portion of the single target damage comes also from the Arcanist brand setup with the dual curse as well as flame surge. With the curse changes, Whispers of Doom is incredibly strong, so we're running flammability and ally weakness to debuff the bosses, as well as flame surge, which gives us automated burning ground that sticks to the boss and automatically gets casted wherever it stands. After tinkering a bit with the POB, I also noticed that one of the biggest multipliers to my damage was actually the modifier that makes the ailments deal damage faster. So because of that, I decided to stack 4 of the medium cluster jewels with blowback and wasting affliction, and this made my damage skyrocket compared to the setup without them. And the chance to ignite was also very useful, allowing me to drop some of the extra passive skill points. The next step was to finalize the POB by making sure I have enough mana to cast the skills, I meet all the attribute requirements, and cap my resistances and spell suppression. And while working on the POB, I leveled the character through the 5 ways to save time, so that we can jump right into the bossing and the T16 maps. But before that, we needed to acquire all of the gear. So the day after making the POB, I crafted all of the gear on stream, I bought all of the remaining items, and afterwards finished the Uber Lab, Pantheons, and made sure that the character works properly, and this was the result. as you can see, the character tackled basically all of the non-Uber endgame. We killed the Feared, we killed Uber Atsiri, Uber Elder, Shaper. You can run T16 maps with pretty much any modifiers you want, because we have also like life and mana recovery on kill coming from the Polymath, right? Let me show this on the POB actually here. So we've got the Polymath, which gives us a recovery of life, energy shield, and mana on kill. Because we're killing with ignites, it counts as killing, so we're getting that recovery. The damage on the POB is about realistically it's more closer to like 6 million, because this 8.5 million also assumes maximum amount of traps, which we don't have up all the time, so it's actually a huge amount of increased damage that we're not really getting. So that's like maybe like 400,000 DPS that we shouldn't have. So it's like about 8 million DPS in perfect condition, about 6 million DPS on average, right? So something like that. You can see the survivability is decent, but we have a low life pool with better rolls for the life on the gear, which I don't have a lot of. So there's a lot of pieces of gear that don't have life or have a very low life rolls, which actually makes my life total look really low, but we still have a decent max hit, enough to do all of the content that we need to do. While bossing, for some of the bosses I spec into the Lethe Shade, for example for doing Uber Elder, right? Because there's lots of like dots, like getting hit for like a half a second or like split second by a Shaper beam while you are slowed, while you took some extra damage from a couple hits, and you're like low life can potentially kill you. But with the Lethe Shade, you're actually much safer in those fights. I was also like swapping some flasks around in order to do some bosses, but other than that, the character is basically exactly like it is in the POB. I can show some of the gear in case you're curious. Again, I don't recommend playing this. This is a complete meme. When I was making this character on stream, I had somebody ask, "Yo, Asmo, do you recommend this build for bossing over Seismic Trap?" And the person didn't clearly get the memo that this is a complete meme build that we're just making to prove a point that yes, you can basically kill all of the end game with any skill that you want, but I don't necessarily recommend that. But yeah, some of the interesting tech that we have that can be definitely shared between different builds is using Siphoning Trap. It's a very cool way of sustaining your life, especially when there's like a lot of enemies, when there are like some ad phases and stuff like that. It really heals you, gives you a lot of mana as well. So it's a very interesting tech to add for any trap skills, especially since we have such a short cooldown. So as you can see, the trap cooldown for me is very short, and the only limiting factor for me is actually very close to cap in terms of like mana and the cooldown, right? So the mana is actually the thing that is capping me instead of the cooldown. So I could invest into a more mana regeneration, but it's fine the way it is. We have mana regeneration coming from the relic, which has the Mage Bane that caps my spell suppression. Here we have the Oscillating Scepter, crafted that on stream. Basically we need Elemental Overload, but it costs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 passive skill points. So 6 passive skill points is a little bit much, and before I was planning on pathing a little bit more to this side, but because we have to pick up the spell suppression here and these nodes, I decided to actually skip this whole part and grab an Oscillating Scepter. We crafted that on stream by basically fracturing the +1 first, and then rolling fossils with fossils for the fire modifier. What are these fossils called again? They're the scorched fossils, right? So I just rolled a bunch of scorched fossils, hoping for either 2 or 3 decent modifiers that benefit my build, and then multi-craft because I needed the chance to ignite craft. Bought the other scepter because it didn't have to be Oscillating Scepter, so again, we just got whatever we needed. That was like highest damage according to the POB, and the chance to ignite as well. Then we have the Bronze Life, which is just something I sniped on trade when I knew that I'm gonna be making this build. I immediately looked for it and sniped it because this is a very rare thing to find. You probably will not be able to find this chest piece, but again, this is not a meta build. If you're doing like a weird build that nobody else is playing, you're probably gonna be able to buy a lot of items for very cheap because they're not gonna be popular, right? So like bronze life in general, 6-link bronze life is not an expensive item, but if you want the +2 to AoE and +2 to duration, that's gonna be an expensive item. We also have Owl's Uprising, so that we can get more of the auras, so that we can reserve the determination. So again, this is like no damage from that. This is just for some extra survivability. Then we have a helmet for basically mana reservation, and other than that, it has unveiled life roll, some fizz taken as fire, resistances, and that's basically it. Then we also have the pyre. The pyre with the catalyst gives me 48% cold damage converted to fire damage. So together with the cold to fire, that's 98%, and that's totally fine. The alternate quality of cold to fire that gives you the extra conversion is actually less damage than this. So we went with the standard cold to fire. We have the Polaric Devastation. I tested this to make sure that traps igniting the targets put ash on them. So I was sitting in like blood aqueducts, using like fire traps and stuff, spamming on monsters them and like seeing if I'm getting the ash, if I'm not getting the ash. So this does work with traps from my testing. Then we have also we have gloves that we also crafted on stream with fire exposure, fire.multi for unique enemies. We got +2 to level of AoE gems because we're running our auras here. So we got like Malevolence here, Scarebots, and Grace. And then we got just life and res on them. Boots, we have the important part here, which is the 100% chance to avoid being chilled, and then cooldown recovery rate of travel skills, and those are the important things. And I needed one roll of spell suppression on something, so I got boots with corrupted spell suppression. The enchant on the boots is actually really big as well. 120% increased critical strike chance if you haven't crit recently. I am not critting ever, because I mean, I am critting only if I crit with like Anomalous Flame Surge from the Arcanist brand, but other than that I am not critting. So this allows me to get basically double the chance to proc Elemental Overload. So it goes from like 6.9% to 12.9%, which is a big deal. So that's much better uptime of the EO. For the boots, we have just cooldown recovery with some life res, armor, and strength, because I need some extra strength roll. And that's basically it when it comes to the gear, right? We got like a basic flask, we got life flask, we got armor evasion, we got quicksilver with curse reduction, because that's basically needed for mapping, right? That's when you use quicksilver flask most of the time. And then we got cinder soul urn for extra recovery and extra damage against ignited enemies, plus extra regen as well. And that's the gear. With the cluster jewels, we've got a big cluster jewel with prismatic, hard, smoking remains, widespread destruction. This allows me to get the prismatic smoking in the front here, so I don't have to spec in the further one, and it allows me to get the extra resistances, which we definitely need, because we're only like a little bit overcapped on the resistances, and overall it's pretty hard to squeeze it all in. And then we got the smoking remains, which is like the most increased damage you can get for this. And the other one is the exact same thing, prismatic, hard, smoking remains. And then we are using 4 medium cluster jewels with blowback and wasting affliction. Again, as I mentioned, the damaging ailments deal damage faster is massive. We got also ignites deal damage faster. This is like your biggest multiplier to your DPS actually. It's a huge multiplier. This makes your ignites quicker, right? So they last shorter duration, so you have to refresh them more often. So if we have some like duration of ailments, and instead of having like 4 seconds or more than 4 seconds ignites, we have like 3 point something seconds, right? So like less than 3.5 seconds, more than 3 seconds duration for the ignites. Other than that, we've got, of course, the Polymath Forbidden Flame jewels. They were not too expensive. They were like within the relative budget of this build, how much I was willing to spend for it. And then we have just Corrupted Blood Jewel with some trap damage, some mana regen, damage over time multiplier, fire damage over time multiplier. This is also very cheap, again, because like fire trap, even though this is potentially a very good jewel, somehow it was still very cheap. And then we got Enduring Composure for the endurance charges, and that's basically it. I think I went over everything here. So hopefully this exercise and this example shows you that you can basically play whatever skill you want, if you put some currency in it, it's going to be able to clear the entire game, right? This is not like, oh my god, dude, you spent money on this. This is not one divine. I only have one divine. Okay, if you only have one divine, pick a league starter. Don't pick a meme build immediately, right? Don't try to play a complete meme of a build and just like completely make something yourself and experiment when you don't have currency, of course, right? But when you have some currency and you can spend 50 divines on a meta build or 50 divines on a non-meta build, you can totally do all the content in the game on a non-meta build as well, right? There are tons of builds to discover and to find. So the main takeaway from this should be like, you can have fun, you can play lots of different builds, and the most important part with any build is to just put the effort into it, right? So with the POB, I was sitting in this POB and trying to figure out, okay, this doesn't give me that much damage, this doesn't give me that much damage. And I was sitting and like looking at the different nodes, and different nodes were only giving me like 2% increased damage per point, which is not that great. So I was trying to figure out, how can I squeeze more damage out of it? How can I get like 4% damage per point? Is there something like that, right? So I was like looking at POB, looking at different items, looking at different cluster jewel notables, seeing if we can use like which modifiers are the best, trying to use every single tool the POB has to offer in order to figure out how we can get enough damage so that we can get this damage efficiently, and then focus the rest of the resources on the basic defenses so we don't make a shitty glass cannon build as well, right? So those are the things that are important, right? It's not that important like which skill you're playing. The skill that you're playing is more of a like a preference, like mechanical preference. Do you like the mechanics of the skill? Do you like how it feels? And if you like how it feels, then you can certainly make most of the skills in the game on most ascendancy work in a way where you can kill the non-Uber bosses and do T16 maps and do all kinds of different strategies. Because you can see, this build can map just fine. It can clear legions pretty well. It can clear Harbies well. It can do all kinds of different mechanics, because essentially it's just ignite proliferation, and ignite proliferation is a very good mechanical way of delivering damage, especially while mapping. And also ignite is pretty good on bossing, because you don't need to constantly hit the boss. You can just refresh the ignite, put the brand on the target, and that's it. The main drawback of this, honestly, is the fact that I have pretty low mana, so I would have to invest, like, if I got like one decent mana roll, or if I dropped a little bit of damage and put like 3 points into some extra mana regen, it would completely solve that. So that's one drawback that we have. And then second drawback is, again, solvable by like 3 passive skill points, because it's the trap trigger AoE. So we can pick the expeditious munitions passive, which we are right next to, and if we get some extra trap trigger AoE, then the build is gonna also feel better, and it will be totally serviceable build, right? It's definitely not something I recommend, but I think we proved the point that you can basically take any skill in the game and make it do all the basic things that you would expect out of a build. So that's it. Hopefully you learned something. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to use the build roulette yourself, you will find the link to it in the description. See you next time. Bye.